like to call the policy committee to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the March 21st minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Stokes, second by, blanking on your last name.
White.
White, thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Policies for first reading. We have, we'll take them individually, but BDE, board committees and structures. This is up for discussion. Any discussion on this?
I think if I might, Mr. Pappas,
Yep.
really quick. If I remember right, I think maybe this one was up for discussion because the discipline committee's on here.
Right.
And so somebody had asked about, or maybe I just dreamed this, but about what will be different with the discipline committee from the process as it works right now. So I just made a chart just for peer review. We don't have to talk about it tonight if you just want to look at it. And but I just so you can see what's happened up to this point, and then what the difference will be with the discipline committee.
Mr. Pappas?
Go ahead, Ken.
I'm just gonna say, because it's just new today, and I know that we're starting the discipline committee, it might be wise for us to just table this one, bring it forward next month so that we have a time to review it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Allison, with this, I know the superintendent had mentioned previously that the laws have changed. Does this include those changes in the laws?
Yeah, so I tried to actually print out the previous version of the law and I could not find it. But one of the major changes is under it's the number of days that a student can be suspended. So in the previous law, right now, a student can only be suspended for up to 20 days. So up to 10 days is a short-term suspension. The principal has the authority, the superintendent can give the principal the authority to suspend for up to 10 days. A long-term suspension is anything up to 20 days. Right now, that comes to the assistant superintendent's office for anything beyond 10 days, between 10 and 20 days. That would go to the discipline committee now. But then beyond that, anything is considered an expulsion beyond 20 days, and there are only certain things you can expel a student for. So in the previous law, my understanding is that a student could be suspended for more days than 20 before it hit expulsion. So I believe that's the major change that he was discussing. The other one is that there are graduated sanctions that we have to give students prior to suspending a student, so interventions in the building for certain infractions. So that's more clearly defined in the law now.
Thank you.
I noticed one of the big differences is that once the discipline committee has a hearing with the student and makes a recommendation, when it goes to the full board, those three members have to recuse themselves. So we should people know that.
Where does it say that?
Page 2, number 2.
It says if they recuse for the hearing, if they were a hearing body,
Well, yeah,
not for
that's
the
what
full
it is.
board.
If there's an expulsion hearing with the full board, the discipline committee wouldn't be part of that hearing body because they were part of the long-term suspension layer at this point.
They know all about the details.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, we would recuse ourselves, right? Or we just wouldn't be able to be present?
I don't think you can participate in the hearing. I don't know if you can be there silently, but you can.
Would the staff, so would staff that were there not be able to be there as well?
Okay, excuse me. I think I back up. I think the discipline committee takes the place of, like currently the assistant superintendent would bring,
Correct.
that would be the discipline committee's role instead.
That's what I
Discipline-
thought, I just
yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
make sure.
yeah.
Okay. So can you just explain that, because I just want to make sure that that's stated. So we would be,
So if the discipline committee was recommending to the full board for expulsion, the discipline committee would bring that recommendation, would present that recommendation. So there would be a hearing, and it would be the discipline committee, it would be the student and their parent, and then the remainder of the board would make the decision about the expulsion.
correct, okay.
Go ahead, John.
Not that this probably would never happen, but what if there was a tie? Because there's 10. Who would be the tiebreaker?
There probably wouldn't be.
There probably wouldn't be, but should there be a plan just in case?
I would think it'd fall back to the discipline committee, no? Or do we
That's-
allow the
no, that's
superintendent to
something
make
that
a
the-
final vote? I
The
don't know.
board would have to.
We have to vote on policy, everything.
Well, no.
Make a policy.
What would happen is the board would have to argue it back and forth until a decision is made.
All right.
I would be arguing, because I'm on the discipline committee.
You know,
Save you some time.
And then the only other thing to consider is just the actually, there's like very specific timelines for scheduling hearings. So if a student is being recommended for a long-term suspension, that meeting with the discipline committee needs to be scheduled with enough time to give parents notice, and before the suspension, the 10-day suspension is up, that hearing has to happen. So that'll just be sort of a logistical thing that we can move through.
So
Anyway, go ahead.
typically, they would call the discipline committee, and then we would set a normal time. So that discipline committee could be on any day of the week. It could be Monday, Tuesday, you know what I mean? So it's whenever.
But it has to be within 10 days.
Right, so what I'm saying is, it's not like the discipline committee meets on like third Thursday of every month. The discipline committee only meets when it's
When needed.
needed, and it could be meeting on a Monday or a Friday or whatever day to fit within that time frame.
Or you
So
could
just
say the
to make-
discipline committee's meeting every Thursday at 5:30, and then we just cancel the ones if there's no hearing. Since that's already a meeting night, you know, you could decide to do something like that, so you know that there's always going to be a time set aside for the discipline committee.
That's actually not, so 5:30, that would give us 30 minutes.
Just a thought, you know, so that you never have to worry about running the clock.
My only concern with that is for the violation of the student. So if we have a meeting at 5:30 and then we have a committee meeting at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and it runs late,
Oh,
that
yeah.
child could be walking out with other people here. So if we were gonna have that, I would suggest we have it upstairs, and there's a different entrance, the exit they can leave, or no? Is there a different? I would wanna keep the privacy of the student, so if there is a committee meeting that night that starts at 6, I would be concerned.
We could definitely use that room, yeah, that's.
We could use it upstairs and then they have the right to exit however they want to, but I would just, that would be my only concern, is the privacy of the student.
Any other concerns? Do we want to table this for a month and bring it back? Let everyone mull it over?
I mean, I feel we've already gone over it.
So is the discipline committee in effect now, moving forward, or?
I would think so, because we already voted it in at the full board.
Okay.
Shane, is that true?
What? I was reading I thought we were tabling this, so I was moving on to the next one. Sorry.
Well, at the end of the policy, it says last reviewed in 2022.
Just the committee was already approved. right?
Yes, we approved that at the last meeting, yes.
All right. We get to the right. So do we want to table it, or any changes to that? It's just discussion only. Okay. Answers my question. DHC, Board Staff Communications, is up for review. Go ahead, Karen.
So this is the one that I had a little bit of concerns about. So staff communication to the board, it says that all communication, or reports, which is fine, all communication shall be submitted through the superintendent. We're not doing that now, so I think we need to change the verbiage of that. Paragraph 2, it says staff communication to the board. I think this board is well aware that if there's a staff that's having a question, we would tell them what the chain of command is, but this board has seemed as though moving forward, we've allowed staff to be able to call and talk to individuals, so I think we need to align it with what we're doing. Do you want
Or-
me to keep going, or, okay.
Oh, if you, I don't care, I mean, if you want to express all your concerns, or we can take your concerns one at a time.
No, we can do one at a time.
My concern with changing the verbiage is people tend to make comments, where, in an example like this, like, they're making decisions based on Kyle, not the superintendent. You know what I mean? They're basing it, they're making it personal. They're not making it the position, they're making it the person. So when Annie comes in and takes over, will it be different?
So can I respond? So my concern is, I want to make it so that it doesn't matter who's sitting in that superintendent position. If a staff member were to want to call us, I don't want to speak for all of you, but my conversation would be, you know, I'm having a concern. Just like Shawnee had mentioned, some parents don't know about the kindergarten enrollment. If a staff were to call, I would have that conversation and say, have you used your chain of command? Have you done this? Sometimes they just want to reach out to you as a constituent because they work in our district. But the way that this is worded, my concern is, we already have had board members that are gonna say, I will talk to a staff member. I think the board is smart enough to know that, A, we have policies that say one board member does not speak for the full board. So at that point, it's written in this one at the end. So just to be clear, it is on this, it's on this one. But I think staff should be able to communicate with the board, and our superintendent, I would hope, would understand that we would support our superintendent, but we'd also be able to have a conversation with a staff member. I think there was a conversation that I had with the librarian at one point, talking about books and, you know, potentially donating. That technically is a conversation with the staff. So I think we're not following the policy. So I think it would be smart to add something in there.
Go ahead, Sean.
Kind of go off what Karen said, hopefully we'll never have another pandemic. But when COVID hit, like you had an outcry of educators come and speak. Some people couldn't come and speak. I know I sent an email to every single board person. I had no idea about a chain of command at that point in time. But I think there are instances where staff communication to us is completely fine. It's how do we respond back type of a deal. So. 2 cents.
Yeah, I think if any staff member calls us, we're not gonna cut them off and say, have you talked to your principal? Have you talked to the superintendent? Have you talked to the assistant superintendent? And if they haven't, we're not gonna just say, well, call them, don't call me. We're all gonna listen. We all know we cannot act. And we're gonna explain to them where they need to go. But still, yeah, with us just talking to them, the way this is written, yeah, we're violating our own policy, but because there's not one person here, I'm sure that's gonna hang up on that person.
I remember doing some sort of research on this, and it's been 2 months since I've looked at this. But I looked up Somersworth, Dover, Portsmouth, Barrington, Oyster River, and they do, some of them have a line in here, I'm trying to figure out what it is. For example, Somersworth has a paragraph that says, staff and board members share a keen interest in the schools and education generally. And it is to be expected that when they meet at social affairs and other functions, they may informally discuss such matters as educational trends, issues and innovations, and general district problems.
That's on here, under social interaction,
Okay.
verbatim.
Yep, okay. And I think that's where that falls in. If you're talking to a librarian and you're talking about whether they have this book or that book, or whether they've considered that book, that's where that would fall under. If you have staff persons calling you, complaining, that's where you say, have you gone through your chain of command? Generally, you forward it on to the superintendent, whatever concerns they have, if they have those concerns. So,
couple people have mentioned the chain of command, but is that in the policy anywhere? And is it in a policy anywhere? And if not, should that be in this policy? Because, I hear what you're saying, Ms. Stokes. If somebody calls me, or Mr. Downs, like, if somebody calls me, I'm not gonna hang up on them. I'm gonna listen to them. And I will remind them about the chain of command, but I would be violating this policy, but it would be nice if it was somewhere in there, that kind of stated like, board members should be reminded to remind staff members of the chain of command and how to, properly deal with the concern that they have.
I think that's the concern though, right? I think we're assuming that it's something that's gonna be negative. I mean, we've received phone calls from staff that's not negative. We've received concerns, we've received, again, some people that work in our district are also people that can vote for us. So I think that makes it a very fine line. So I understand, I would just think that, I think we could put something that says all, school-related business or report, I think we could put something, but I think to tie our hands and tell, because we're really not gonna be the ones that kind of get held accountable, right? Like, we're elected officials, it's gonna be really difficult. We're tying the hands of our staff is really what we're doing, because we're saying staff can only communicate to the board. And so that's making staff nervous to reach out to us, and I don't think there should ever be a reason why staff should feel that they can't reach out to us, positive, negative, neutral, or whatever. I feel like we're all smart enough to know what we can and can't say in a phone conversation, and think we're also smart enough to say when we might have to recuse ourselves from a conversation if we are privy to more information. But I think to say that staff can't, you're basically making staff feel as though they can't, and I think that's where my issue is. Staff should feel as though they can reach out to the board, and the board should feel comfortable saying, unfortunately, this is really not something I can help you with. My suggestion would be doing this. Or they could be just calling to say something amazing happened, and you still, under this policy, you still can't, you still can't. So it's not just the bad, it's the good, bad, and just the neutral. They might have questions about where we stand in certain policies to, to hire us, like to vote for us or to support us, but they can't. We're tying their hands.
Allison, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, I know that the incoming superintendent, as one of her top priorities, if not the top, is communication. And I wonder if this might be a good opportunity for committee members to work with the new superintendent. I think she's gonna value and respect the position that the board, the care that the board has for our staff, and want to be able to reflect that in a good way, that a positive way in a policy. But this might be an opportunity to work with her on the verbiage around the policy. So, and just to hear her thoughts on it as well. I think she probably has some thoughts as well.
Just a good
just
idea.
a recommendation.
How would you recommend that we wait until June or July?
I think you're all meeting with her individually. I mean, I think there are going to be opportunities, or wait, you maybe informally in those one-on-ones, but maybe table it till July. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the timeline, but.
I'm happy to forward her this policy and ask her for opinions, but Shane, you go ahead.
Yeah, I talked to her this morning when we went over the contract with her, and I told her there's a lot of stuff about leaning on this policy. And yeah, she's all about transparency, and you're not gonna see her having an issue with staff talking with us. I'm not saying we just throw that in there, all staff is welcome to contact school board members, but that's where we're at now. It's gonna be like a 180 with her, talking with her. I explained, my biggest thing, we haven't made it to that paragraph yet, is visits to school, where the full board needs to be aware of it. So she completely was, couldn't even believe that that's even in our policy. But going back in that first comment, I think what Nick said is putting in there, reminding about the chain of command, but making sure staff, some way putting in there that they have every right to contact board members, and making sure they know that it's okay to contact board members. Some way of putting it in there would also have in the chain of command.
I liked your idea, because I have concerns with the visits to the school, and I have board communication to staff. So I would say, I don't want to do board business with a private conversation with ours. I don't think that puts us in a good alignment, so I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know that having personal conversations with her for transparency reasons is a smart way to go. So I would encourage either, because we know what we're doing, I would encourage either to table it until she comes, because June's coming very quickly. So I'm on board with tabling it until she comes, or like Matt had said, emailing it to her. But I don't also want to make her feel like she has to do work for the Rochester district before she comes either. But I think we should get her feedback, because I think we hired her because we wanted some, innovative thinking. I think that would be a really smart move, because I think all 3 sections should potentially be changed.
So she plans on being up here, I believe, pretty soon, a couple days a week. And I'm sure if we ask her to be here at the next policy meeting, she was gonna be here tonight, but she had something at her own district where she had to present something, or she would have been here tonight. But I think we can ask her to be here next month and table this and see, and get her opinion on this one. I don't wanna wait till July 1st, because it's in first reading, it's gotta go through 2 different readings, and it would be nice to have this policy ironed out by September 1st.
I can work with her as well. I haven't even really thought about that, but,
So,
whatever.
I think we expressed our concerns. I think we expressed our concerns to her and told her, I think you could communicate what our concerns are. I think she could iron it out. So do you want me to make a motion to table it
That would
tonight? So
be
I'm gonna
good.
make a motion to table policy BHC, board staff communications.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
It's the same thing, it's in the
Always
policy.
should be.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Mr. White. All right, next up is EBBA 3, medication policy for deletion.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. So we have policy JLCD, which is administering medication to students, and then EBBA is the medication policy, which maybe should have been deleted when JLCD was adopted or revised, because JLCD was adopted in 2023. The big difference in EBBA-3 is that it specifies that there's a time frame when students can be given Tylenol only. So it's 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. and that it's only Tylenol, so that time frame no longer actually exists in the other policy. So I just wanted to point that out, but JLCD is a much more comprehensive and updated policy that was just adopted in June of 2023. To confuse matters just a little bit more, when we were looking at this afternoon, there's another policy which I'll bring next month. I think it's EBBA-1. Yeah, 1, which is yet another policy that is about medications, and I just need to cross-reference this with JLCD to make sure there's nothing in EBBA-1 that's not also in this new policy. I just didn't have a chance to do it, but I just wanted you to be aware that there's still another medication policy out there lingering that I'll be looking at.
So are you still in support of deleting this one? Or
Yes,
do you want to hold on?
yes, I want to delete EBBA-3, and I will probably delete this one as well. I just want to make sure we're not missing anything in this policy that's not also in this one. There's just a lot of duplicates in our policy.
Yeah, I noticed in this other policy, it has a time frame as well, and only Tylenol,
Right.
not Advil, or other medicine.
So I'll make a motion to delete EBBA-3 medication policy for Rochester School Health Services.
Okay, motion by Ms. Stokes and who
Shelley.
seconded? Ms. But,
Alan.
Ms. Allen, okay, I couldn't hear. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Physical restraint of students, JGG, up for deletion.
This is a policy that we're required by law to have updated. I have my good friend Sarah here to help, just if you have any questions about the old policy, because I am recommending that we're deleting JGG and the accompanying notification and permission form so that we're in compliance with the law. And so the next one that's coming to you for adoption is JKAA, which is the updated restraint and seclusion policy that's based on the updated law. There's also a required form, which I didn't include here, but it's on the state New Hampshire Education Department page that we're using instead. The law changed in the fall. So I just want you to know that the schools are aware of the law change, so even though the policy is a little bit behind schedule, we are following the law in our restraint and seclusion practices in the buildings right now and have been since the law changed.
Go ahead, Ken.
So I'm gonna make a motion to delete JGG, physical restraint of students.
Okay. Motion by Ms. Stokes, second by Mr. White. Just curious, do we want to add JGGR into this or do a separate motion?
Well,
Which is just the
do you
form.
wanna just do discussion though, because,
That's fine.
okay. So, can we include the form, because you said it's a new form, so you've included the other policies when you're deleting one, so is there a way that we can bring forward the form for next, because I'd
Sure.
like to see the two in comparison?
Yep.
So that's why I
Again, the
didn't
form
suggest
is-
both, because I'd like to see the form first.
Yeah, and the form has the required information,
Yeah.
which is why we're switching to that form, because it's in line with what we're required to do. So we'll have that for the next meeting.
Which makes sense, but,
Yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna delete one, it'd be nice for us to see what the other one looks like, just for future reference.
Any other, go ahead.
Yeah, SROs bound by this?
No.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of deleting JGG? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Let's see, Ms. Stokes, did you say you wanted to wait on deleting JGG?
I would like to hold off until we see the new one. I'm assuming it's gonna be fine, but I think just to do our due diligence, it'd be nice to see, because it's a state form, so it'd be nice to compare the two.
Yeah, so the state one it's 13 pages also, so it's not just a form like this one.
Yeah.
So it's 13 pages with other things you do on top of it, and it's created between the DOE and then DHHS also completed together,
So it seems like it's more of a discussion to have, like, so that we're more informed.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want me to motion
Does that
to
mean
table
we
it?
need to table it, I assume? Go ahead.
So I'm gonna make a motion to table JGGR, physical restraint notification and permission form.
Is there a second? Okay, second by Mr. Cormier. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion,
Opposed.
okay. Motion passes. Next policy is JKAA, use of restraint and seclusion. This is a new policy. Over this. Go ahead.
So, I'm assuming this is gonna be towards you, Ms. Camuso. I just have a couple questions, because I was looking at the policy. Does a parent have to sign off before a child could be secluded? So is there a form that a parent has to sign off? Because it used to be.
So we used to have something like that, and I have also a little handout that goes along with this too, just indicating sort of the former definitions of seclusion and the current definition of seclusion,
Yeah.
which likely could be in there as well.
It's in the policy.
Yep. But No, so we had something beforehand, but it sort of goes along with the idea of the previous permission form. We can't get permission to seclude or permission for a restraint. What we could be doing is there are some students that may have something similar to like a seclusion where that's a space they go to when they're already escalated or they need a place to go to. That could be a space that the IEP team has already discussed for them. So then that way we'd have parent permission that way for something like that. But
So I was told, and I have not gotten the law, but I was told that if a child chooses to go in a room that's seclusion, you're not really secluding them, you're
Yes.
just providing that space.
Yes.
But if a staff member makes a decision to put a child in a room that doesn't have access to leave
Yeah.
with no exit, that the parents had to sign off that they acknowledged that their child was gonna be secluded and they had to be notified every time it happened.
So it probably is the idea, there's two different parts of this. So it's when this first came out with everything in September, when we first started talking about this through the DOE, we got a few different things from them saying like, this is seclusion, this isn't seclusion. And then it was such a big topic, because before they used to talk about like a student that went to the principal's office that was, so basically like Allison and you were in the principal's office and you were the one in trouble, but I had to leave because there was something else going on. There's no one in that room anymore. They were saying that was considered seclusion, but it's not, no, and that was cleared up with all that part of it. So there's been lots of going back and forth. The one thing for seclusion that I like to bring out is, looking here, so the exclusion area. So it talks about the voluntary separation of a child from a stressful environment, and it continues with doing that, circumstances in which there's no physical barrier and the child is physically able to leave, and then involuntary confinement into a room or area with an adult who is actively engaging in therapeutic intervention. So what I had mentioned beforehand was that idea of a student that's in a space, but they're working on, they're actively working on therapeutic interventions, which really goes back to their behavior support plan or the behavior intervention plan.
Okay, so I also got my information from the DOE.
Yeah.
And I was told that parents at an IEP meeting had to sign off, knowing if there was gonna be a part where they were going to put a child in, as far as the definition of seclusion.
Yeah.
They're putting a child in a room that the child cannot get out of, so there is no lock on the other side of the door.
Yeah.
And that they have to, of course, they have to be like, somebody has to be watching them or whatever, so there
Yeah.
has to be some kind of, but that parents had to sign off that they were in approval. So if you're saying that's not true, I'm just gonna get
No.
clarification.
No, so it sounds like what they're saying is true, and it sounds like what I'm saying is true. The idea is that if a student has a behavior support plan, that information is included in the student's IEP that the parent is signed off on. But that part of it. The other idea, the behavior support plan, we're also having parents sign off on that part of it, so that they know and also in agreement with that happening. Because we don't want to be doing something that a parent does not agree with, because then we have other avenues that we have to go to, if you have to keep family and people safe.
So,
But I think what you mean is, but if a student has to be secluded and there hasn't been a sign up, that's when we fill out the form.
Yes.
If there's an incident where.
but it has to be filled out beforehand, because you can't seclude a child without the parent knowing ahead of time, is what I was told by the DOE is the law.
Okay.
So I just wanna make sure, if the law has changed this fall,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanna make sure that my information isn't incorrect. So if the law has changed, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And I was also told that, and it's in here, that every single time like that happens, the parent has to, like, there's a notification. And
There
that
is.
is in there.
Yeah.
But I just wanna make sure that if the law has changed to
Yeah.
reflect that, I'd like to know. Because
Yeah.
I was told, and I had a child in the district, I had to sign off every year that I understood that my child
Yes.
would be in a secluded room.
Yeah.
And I don't see that in here, which is a concern, and I'd also like to see the documentation that the parents sign, because I think it'd be important for us to see. So,
Yeah.
right, if it's in a behavior plan, that's a parent signing off. But if a child just has an IEP without a behavior plan, and they decide that, you know what I mean, again, if a child chooses to go in that room, that is not seclusion, and I get it. But if a staff member makes a choice to put a child in a room because they need to be secluded, and that parent hasn't signed off because they didn't have a behavior plan, I just wanna make sure we're following the law on that.
Yeah, and I can look into and also
Yeah.
talk to the DOE for that part of it, but we would be notifying the parents. They wouldn't be signing, obviously, so if a parent, if they didn't have it in their behavior support plan, or they didn't have any of that beforehand, we wouldn't be obviously notifying the parents if there was that reason. And I just noticed a typo in here too, I'm sorry. But when we're going through this, we're thinking though that if we're doing a seclusion, I would imagine that we've already gone to the point that we would already have plans and supports in place for that student.
Well, I would hope, but when we're
Yes.
writing a policy,
Yes,
I would
yeah.
like it to make sure, because when we have staff reading that policy,
Yeah,
I wanna make sure we're not doing something. And I also think that if you're gonna seclude a child, the parent should be on board with that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's necessarily a negative thing. but
yeah,
If a parent doesn't want their child to have seclusion, that IEP team needs to come up with a different decision in the behavior plan, which I get.
Yeah.
But I feel like that should definitely be in the policy, because and again, I could be wrong, because the law, it sounds like the law changed, so I would just, if we could look
Yeah.
into that.
I will definitely.
Can I continue, do you mind if I keep going?
Go ahead.
And then I did like that it said the parents would be notified, but I just wanna make sure, so if a child, and I don't think this is, I think this is extreme, but if a child is secluded at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 12 o'clock in the morning, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon, 3 different notifications would be sent home. So I just wanted to make
Yes.
sure that that's clear.
Yes.
And then they said that they would make reasonable efforts to notify the parents if there was a restraint or a seclusion, and I think I'd like more of a definition as to what a reasonable effort is, because it doesn't state anything. Like, are we gonna call the parents are working, so we're not gonna, are we gonna send documentation home? Are we gonna do a multiple of things where we call, send a letter home, and then send a letter in the mail? I just wanna make sure that we're following our basis, because it's not really clearly defined, and I think when we're talking about going across all school districts, I would hate for school A to say, well, we just called, and school B to say, well, we just sent an email, and schools, you know what I mean? I think it'd be nice if we had that clearly defined. So a
Yeah.
phone call will be made and a letter will be sent home.
No, and I think some of that will be cleared up too with the form part of it, because that's part of the form on there too. So, yeah, but I think even having it in here would be helpful, just so then that way all 10 campuses or locations know what we're doing.
Right, and I kind of think like with the medication, like to line them both up, I think would, you know what I mean? More information is sometimes better.
Yeah.
But I think the major one is just making sure that, I think the laws, it stated before that parents had to make sure they signed off
Yeah.
beforehand, so I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
that's-
and I do remember previously us as a district doing that.
I've had to sign it,
Yes,
so I
yep,
get it,
yep.
but I just want to make sure if that's still the case, I feel like it needs to be in here, because we need to make sure we're following that.
Yep.
That's all I have. Thought it would be longer.
Any
Really,
other-
seriously?
Any other issues, comments, complaints, or additions, subtractions?
I just want to say it's beautifully written. I know our last policy was maybe 1 page, and I've read this through, and I think your definitions are on point. So while I'm nitpicking, I think the policy, it's written really, really well, and the definitions are in there, and like, it's 100%, I love it, but those are just, so I wasn't nitpicking.
No, I didn't think you were.
It is very thorough at 9 pages, so.
Which I think it has to be when you're gonna
It-
hold a
it-
child, when you're
yes.
gonna restrain or
True.
seclude
Yes.
a child, I
Yep.
think you
Yep.
need as much information as
Yep.
possible.
Is there a motion to go along with this, Karen?
So I'm gonna make a motion to move forward, hold on, I'm gonna get to page 1, 9 pages you said. JKAA, use of restraints and seclusion to the full board for first reading.
Okay, motion by Ms. Stokes, second by Ms. Allen. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Next item is student conduct, JIC for discussion. Get to that page.
Page 21.
I think somebody requested to see it.
Is it me?
I'm trying to read it and try to.
I think it's because Shane talked about progressive discipline, and I think I said it'd be smart to look at it. So I read it and I understood it, but I didn't know if Mr. Downs had any questions.
I read it now, yeah.
It's also listed in the school handbooks too. Student parent handbooks is what progressive discipline is, as I recall.
just my concern is it's that, I would probably say more at the elementary level, that, when it comes to disciplines, it's not across the board the same. It depends on what school you're on and where. So I think it'd be wise for all the administrators at that level to maybe get on the same page and make sure everyone's doing following the same guidelines and following the same policies, because I'm at a point sometimes I wonder if we should make our policies should have more shall in here, rather than giving our administrators more of a, what do you want to call it there? Discretion. Because I just don't think discipline, there's enough accountability at the elementary level.
So I think our policy is pretty well written, but it sounds like our implementation of the policy may need a little bit of work. So I think Matt, Mr. Pappas had brought up before, like a workshop. I think that's what we're kind of finding within the district is different buildings may do things differently and interpret it. So I think looking at our policy, I think there's some really good progressive disciplines in there, and I think it's broad enough, but I think having, maybe having a discussion with Allison and the new superintendent to say, how do we take this policy and make sure that, at that point we set procedures, like do we have any procedures on this stuff? And would we take the policy and then make it into a procedure within the district?
Yeah.
So I think the policy, in my opinion, is good, but I think maybe we need to have Allison kind of go over what they take from this and how we set procedures within each building so that we align more consistently, so we're more equitable throughout our district and with our staff and students.
Yeah, that's a list, please, for you to go over with
I got it.
Amy. Thank you.
Like page 10.
Go ahead, Shani.
I don't think it's even just discipline between elementary schools. I think it's discipline between administrators within the same school can be different on how they interpret it. So for all administrators to kind of all get on the same page across the district.
Good discussion.
Kelly.
Good, Kelly.
I know it's not, it wasn't punishment, but couldn't we add change petition to the progressive disciplines? So that families know and staff knows, and you have counseling on there, you have all the different choices of discipline. Shouldn't change petition be a
I would put it under graduate age program.
Number 2.
Yeah, I would put it under number 2.
I can work on that. That's,
Makes sense. Any objections to that? I assume you made note of that, right, House?
yes.
Any other thoughts, comments, additions? It is first read, so we can always come back to it too next month. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, just, I think the policy's not bad, I think it's just the implementation and maybe doing a workshop or whatever on, like Shawnee said, even if it's administrators within one building, how do we make sure that they're following the same? Do we have a discipline matrix?
We do, but when some of the new discipline laws came into play, I think they had to look at the matrix differently, so I think it's definitely a good time to revisit.
Yeah, can we put it on the agenda?
Yeah.
Is that okay, Mr. Conlon?
Of course. Go ahead, Sandy.
Sandy, I don't see anything in here, and I'm not reading carefully probably, but where the documentation should have to be done. When this child is acting up or whatever and becomes a problem, before you get to any kind of a hearing, I would think
That might be in a
whoever's
different-
involved in that would have to do documentation at the time.
Yeah, that might be under a different policy. Like I know we're gonna look at JICD next, and, there's some clear things outlined in that policy.
Okay, as long as it's documented at the time, not a day later or 3 weeks later or something else, huh?
I agree with Sandy. I'd like to see something added for documentation, just because I think even if it's in another policy, you know, how is it documented? If it's progressive and it's parent conferences or whatever, I mean, I'm assuming it has to be documented in our system. And if we're gonna do a CHINS, they're gonna want that information. But also when we're looking at the pattern of the student. So I actually think Sandy's correct. I'd like to have it added in this policy as well.
And speaking of documentation, I think I recalled you saying you were working on trying to mesh the two, like, systems because it's duplicate, like, documentation. Is that still?
Yeah, that's a big, I think that will be a big project because there's so much in IC, and so to try to figure out, because Swiss is such a, that's the documentation you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Swiss is, I have found to be such a useful tool when you really want to drill down to look at patterns and, you know, all kinds of things around behavior. So, but IC has a very different that will be a big project because there's so much in IC, and so to try to figure out, because Swiss is such a, that's the documentation you're talking about, right? Swiss is, I have found to be such a useful tool when you really want to drill down to look at patterns and, you know, all kinds of things around behavior. So, but IC has a very different set of, you know, what it can do, so that is a big conversation that, or a big dilemma. I haven't quite
It's
ironed
on our
out yet.
to-do list.
Good luck.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Karen.
So I'm gonna make a motion, hold on, I gotta get to the top page again. Where is it?
JIC.
I'm gonna make a motion to move JIC to the full, student conduct to the full board for first reading.
Okay. Motion by Ms. Stokes, second by Mr. White. Any discussion? I assume that's with some of the additions.
With the additions.
Yep. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next item is JICD, suspension and expulsion, the minor changes.
There's a typo on the one that I sent to you. It's a pretty important word that I mixed up, so I'm just gonna pass out the new version.
We all make mistakes.
Thank you for
right?
your patience with me. Which I wanna know where it is. Let's see if I can find it.
You put a tree down. Well, just give it
Shane, just go grocery.
I'm okay with that.
Just for all three.
I'm okay with that.
Where was it?
Okay, so, and it's not in color, I'm sorry. So it's in the first paragraph, it's the last sentence in the first paragraph. And again, I have Sarah here to just help me explain why we're recommending this addition to the policy. So it says, prior to the suspension of a student who is identified as disabled, the principal or designee will consult with the school or district coordinator for special services. I had the superintendent or designee will consult with the school. That was my typo. It should say principal, not superintendent. So the copy that you were emailed previously said superintendent.
Where?
The one I
This
handed
is
out
the
to you.
correct-
Yeah,
Yes,
no.
yeah.
So the correct one is,
So the principal is the one who would do the suspension, the short-term suspension of a student. It's not the superintendent who suspends a student. I put the word superintendent in there instead of principal in the initial one that I sent to you, but it should read principal.
Makes sense.
And
I don't understand the sentence though. I'm reading this one, right?
Right,
This is
that's
the
the
one.
correct one.
So prior to the suspension of a student who was identified as disabled, the principal or designee will consult with the school?
School
Or
coordinator or
direct-
district
So
coordinator.
it just says school. Am I
School.
reading this
I-
correctly?
School or district coordinator.
School or, okay, I'm looking
Yeah.
at it as a building. Sorry, listen, I just want to make sure, school or district coordinator for special services. Do we have school coordinators?
We have 3, so preschool, middle school, and high school. So,
Okay.
Weren't you one of them?
I was, yeah.
That's all.
And we're adding that part, and correct me if I'm wrong, our suspension rate for students who have IEPs is significantly higher in Rochester than the state average. And so we're just trying to get a handle on what's going on there, and we really want to lean on our student services experts to collaborate with our building principals when making a decision about suspension for students with disabilities.
I think it's important too, so like if they come, I don't know, maybe you can't do it, but I think some board members have said, like, I don't think they understand that there could be outside factors, right? So it could just be short staffing, it could just be that we didn't, like, we don't have a lot of mental health workers, and it could be that, certain services aren't available, or it could just be that it's right after a vacation and they couldn't handle it. So I think it would be important, without giving too much information, to be able to explain some of those when we get some of the data, because I don't want it to seem as though kids with a disability just get a scapegoat and be like, oh, it's a manifestation, let them walk. I don't think that that's the case.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that we educate those that may not understand it, because I think the only way to align as a full board is to be able to understand. So I think giving reasons for potential, no, you know what I mean? And I think it's a tricky scope, because you don't want to give any identifying information, but I also think it'd be worthwhile, this, not the student A, this was the issue, but this is the reason why it's considered a manifestation of the disability, because I think that's really important for some of us to understand.
Yeah.
So I got a question. So when you're setting an IEP and setting the standards for it, can you set, like, if something is a recommendation by somebody and it's absolutely completely ridiculous, that's, you can't give that to somebody like, I don't know, they need to be first in line at lunch, or they're gonna, can that be put in their IEP so they just get to cut everybody? How is that teaching them in the real world how to operate?
Yeah.
So you can put it in an IEP, so I'm just asking, can we put in an IEP that can be first in line at lunch?
So I wouldn't put that one in there, because I think the same idea of what you had mentioned. I think there's lots of times you're not going to allow for every child to be first in line, and I think we have to teach the students those skills to be able to do it. I think the other part that we have to keep in mind, and when we're weighing it, is where the student currently is. Because they're not going to be able to work on everything that we need them to work on, and that's the reason why they're eligible for 3 years. And then we reevaluate to see if they're still eligible, and then we continue those services if they are. But if we want to be able to pinpoint where they're going to be able to do that and where they're actually at. I think that there may be some times that you can control a time that the student is going to be able to be first. Then you may put that in the IEP, saying that when Johnny goes to get snacks, he's first in line, because we'd be able to control that part of it for that time. But it really is up to the IEP team. So we do get recommendations from evaluators, from parents, from administrators, everybody that's coming to those meetings, and it is a team discussion with that part of it, and a team decision.
Okay, so parents could come forward and ask for something that's completely off the wall, and the team could be like, no, that's just a little.
And I think for that part of it, though, a lot of times parents are coming because they don't know how to support that child, kind of thing. And they are seeing their child that's struggling, and they want them to succeed, because that's what all parents want. So I think they're just having a hard time of figuring it out, and it really takes a group of people coming together to be able to talk through that.
So just as an example, because you asked about it, my son had it in his IEP that he was the last person in line. He was the door holder, because he, in his mind, if he was in front of Shane Downs to go outside, he wanted to be in front of Shane Downs to come inside. So he only fixated on the person. So instead of like fixating on the person, he fixated on the door holder. I hold the door open, and then staff would make sure that he walked in. It worked really well, until one day somebody didn't follow his IEP, and he thought he was last in line, and they put him in the middle, and he had a meltdown. If they had followed his IEP, it would have been fine. So there are instances where that works for the child, because they can't focus on where they are in line, they can only focus on at the beginning or the end. So I think there's reasons behind that, which is why it is an IEP team. And every time that kid was in the back and held that door open, never had a single issue. And it was in his IEP for 4 years, so.
And Sarah is gonna speak more next month at the special services about manifestation and, you know, that this might be more for next month's conversation, but
Yeah.
just so you know, that's coming.
Shane, did you have anything?
No, she's gonna talk more, I just want some just more clarification on how IEPs are set up and that kind of stuff. She's going there, it's already getting late.
Is there a motion to move JICD to full board?
So moved. For first reading.
First read, okay. Motion by Ms. Stokes, second by Ms. Allen. Any discussion? Not to as amended, right, with the addition of the sentence?
Yep.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next item is, second reading is board officers, and I believe we tabled that because of the comment in the, or the item listed in the city charter that the superintendent shall serve as secretary. I sent information to our attorney, Mr. Grossman, as requested, and I have not heard back from him yet. So, I don't know if we want to keep that on the table.
So I think do we need another motion to table it?
No, it's on the table, we haven't taken it out.
So yeah, I think we table it until we hear from Mr. Grossman.
Okay. Anything for the 5-year plan? It's on the agenda. I can tell you what's on it in a second.
It was process of policies training from New Hampshire School Board Association.
Process about it. We have had some training, but I don't know if it was specific to policies. But we'll want to look at that maybe next month, seeing it's already 9:30.
So 2 years ago, I asked for a password for the New Hampshire School Board, and he sent it to me. I don't know if it's still valid, but I think it'd be worthwhile for the policy committee members, since we pay for membership, to have a sign-on and password. So could we make sure that they get, because if we're looking at new policies or policies, I think it'd be wise for us to be able to look that up. So I don't know if we all need a different password and sign-on, but if you could look into that.
There's another over-the-counter medication prescription form.
This will be quick. So this is directly connected to some of the policy changes with medication. And this is coming from our school nurses. They've been working on this. I'm going to give you a packet. I think only one of the pages is new, and it's the over-the-counter consent form that would go home to parents. So I believe the prescription consent form already goes home to parents, and then JLCDA-R is the consent form. So parents have to sign off for any medical treatment of their students in school. This is just an addition. The nurses are hoping to add more than Tylenol to what they can offer to students with parent consent. And so they just, they created, it's that first permission form in the packet. They created one that looks pretty similar to the prescription form. It's just for the over-the-counter option. So they were looking for your approval for that.
This is the whole packet, right?
This is the whole packet, and they're also, and I should say this too, it's not, I think some of the policies are saying only students grades 6 through 12. They're looking to treat students K through 12. So that would be, again, with parent consent, but that would be a change. The policy, the most updated policy that we talked about this evening does not clarify ages.
Is the adding of cough drops for a sore throat and antibiotic ointment, is that new?
And ibuprofen, I believe the older policies only had Tylenol.
Okay. I think in my experience is my number one request for going to the nurse is to get cough drops. And I oftentimes never hear them coughing.
So my concern would be, and acetaminophen or ibuprofen, it says not for fever per policy. We have to change our policy. We can't have something that doesn't align with our policy. So I would say that this needs to come forward next month with the policy so that we can't have one undermine the other. Do you see where it says it?
Oh, yep.
So it says Tylenol or Advil.
I
and
think
then-
because they have to go home for fever, but I will double check that and I'll get some clarification on that.
As long
Yeah.
as the two align, I
Yeah.
don't care how they align, you know what I mean? I just wanna make sure that our other policy doesn't, just gonna get
Yeah.
ourselves in that pickle again.
We may want to just say per policy X, whatever the letters are.
Yep.
But if we have to change the policy to reflect that they can have it without fever.
I don't think that, I think Allison's right in the sense that I think it's because you can't be given Tylenol or Advil in school for a fever because they're not allowed to be in
They
school.
want you to go to home, they want you to go home.
Oh, so they can only give it for headaches or pain.
Right.
But maybe we put that in the other policy, is they can be giving it to them for, I don't know, I'd like to see what the other policy says.
Okay. Shani?
I'm assuming once this is approved, it would go home at the beginning of the school year with all the other.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Are you looking to have this approved or first reading?
Yeah.
Would this be attached to a particular policy?
If there's no policy to move it forward with.
I think it aligns with, it's in here somewhere.
Consent for school health services medical, JLCDA-R.
Yes. That might be it.
I think I can just motion to move the form forward. So I'm gonna make a motion to move the Rochester School District SAU 54 over-the-counter medication permission form to the full board for first reading.
Okay, motion by Ms. Stokes, second by Ms. Allen. Any discussion?
The JLCDA-R is this.
And it's JLCD, I'm sorry, it's the one that we were looking at before. But I will double check that fever piece and just make sure it's consistent with the policy and we can reference the actual policy.
Yeah, and can you just make sure it's in the packet for next month so we can see it? Perfect.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. And the next thing on the agenda,
And one thing on the other.
go for it.
So Steve emailed Kyle and Allison and myself about something he heard that our administrators are now using instead of evacuation, they're using the phrase of removal of the audience. So under policy KA-1, emergency information, it states the board supports the need for communication between parents, students, and schools. The superintendent or designee is instructed to inform parents and students in a case of emergency or unusual circumstances that occur during a school day. Communication will be in writing or through the use of school-wide instant alert notification system. So just, I want to make sure, and I think, Alice, you answered the question in his email that they are using the removal of the audience, which I know Sandy, a couple months ago, she wasn't a fan of what they call an evacuation. And I'm fine with the removal of an audience, but I just want to make sure that our policy that we have is an unusual circumstance would be if you want to call it removal of the audience or evacuation, that it's being followed and staff are being, parents are being notified.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure that, yeah, they want to use removal of the audience, sure, but it's still an evacuation, just in, I guess, a less traumatizing phrase. I'm guessing, is that why they're using it, or?
Yes, that's exactly it, yeah. And I think depending on the situation.
Okay,
But yes, the expectation would still be that parents are.
okay.
Did we ask for data about removing when we have, like, for how many times we've had to remove? I think we mentioned it before, but would that, what committee would that go to? Oh, yeah. You don't have to have it by next month, but can we just get some maybe by the end of the year so that we can see, like, what the end of the year data looks like break it down by school, how many times they've had to evacuate or remove, whatever you want to call it, but anytime children had to be removed from a learning environment due to situation. Couldn't think of the words, thank you.
Any others?
Super quick, you had mentioned the thing last week or whenever about having to have staff members sign off on all policies. Is that something that the policy committee would do, or I don't know who would do that, but?
It's a great question. I don't think it is written into policy. It's a practice that, it's basically if I screw up as a professional, I've signed my name on something and then they can use it to dismiss me and punch me or what have you. But I can double check on that if you'd like.
Just before you, just gonna do public comment. I know there's nobody here, but you're just gonna at least do it.
Oh, I skipped right over that. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, there's nobody here, so you're just gonna go quick.
Any others though? Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on.
All those people out there.
Sandy?
Yeah, I'd like to move adjournment. Second.
Okay. Motion by Ms. Keen, second by Ms. Allen. All those in favor?
Oh, wait, we didn't have a discussion.
Shush.
Just kidding.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?